fact that British economic interests, or these working class economic interests, are probably with the Confederacy. The working class of England supported a boycott of the South, a cotton boycott, which reduced cotton supplies in Britain, in the interest of we are wage slaves, they are real slaves, we have something in common. So in some sense, there's also a class solidarity. And the really surprising for us is if you read the popular working class press, how much it deals with international politics and what we would think would be the liberation struggles of people around the world. I mean, it's sort of surprising given that we don't think of now union movements as particularly interested in international politics. But they were, and in some cases still are. All right, so that's my kind of broad background story. The national story, the imperial story, the story of how we come to know about all this, and you'll see more examples of all of these things as I progress. And we're just one step away from the realist versus idealist position in politics. Okay, so I want to now talk to you about the Red Cross, because the Red Cross is the paradigmatic organization for the position that politics in the question of human rights and humanitarianism is basically polluting. The position that Sam Moyn attacks in the article that you read. So the idea is that we want to intervene. Humanitarianism and caring for the rights of other people isn't a political issue; it's a universal issue, right? So that's so the Red Cross is that organization which represents it, and as you'll see in a moment, it's against that position that many modern human rights organizations, like Physicians for Human Rights, Physicians Without Borders, and we'll talk about, position themselves. What? I'm sorry? So the Red Cross is paradigmatic of this particular position. So what that means is that humanitarian is meant to reject. Well, okay. Let's just leave it at that. So it's a paradigmatic thing. Where does the Red Cross come from? Well, you have the founding document of the Red Cross, a Swiss, a Genevan businessman is in Italy, and he arrives in Italy a few days before June 24th, 1859, to witness one of the great battles of the Italian Wars of Independence, in which the French, on the side of the government of Piedmont, which is leading Italian independence, the northern Italian state of Piedmont, against the Austrians, who were the colonial power. This is what he looks like, and he got a Nobel Peace Prize as an old man, and was much honored all around the world. This is a French imperial stamp of him in Algeria. Now again, here's a battle. I'm showing you a representation of this battle in a British newspaper. So this is the battle which everyone who reads a newspaper, and these are mass circulation. These illustrated as about 100,000 people. This is a big paper. So these are mass circulation newspapers and magazines. Know about this battle of Solferino. So he goes there and he witnesses it, and you read what he writes. Notice how much that report is in the tradition of the humanitarian narrative that I've talked about. The soldier black in their face bleeding, the soldier crying out for help, one after the other individual vignettes of someone suffering that you can connect to. And then he talks about how he organizes local people to help these different dying soldiers without regard to who they are. So he asked the local Italians to go help their enemies as well as their friends. Right? Remember that you've read something of that section. So then he goes home to Geneva, and he writes this memoir, and the memoir is translated into all the languages of Europe. And in 1863 leads to the founding of the International Red Cross. Now, the International Red Cross is an organization that's run by, at this point it's signed only by European countries, but it's run by and will continue to be run by for about 40 years, only citizens of Geneva, and ultimately then citizens of Switzerland. So the idea is it's run by people who are politically neutral, politically clean. No nation is supposed to have an interest in the running of this organization. And the second thing that comes out of this, number one, the founding of the Red Cross, and second, the next year, the creation of the first Geneva Convention on the treatment of prisoners and the rights of the wounded. There'll become a series of Geneva Conventions which will cover other sorts of issues. So the Red Cross is then meant to, in some sense, monitor, if you will, the provisions of the Geneva Convention, to monitor and assure the rights of prisoners of war, to care for the wounded, to remove wounded soldiers, to care for the dead. It wasn't until 1934 that civilians came under the umbrella of the Red Cross. Now I'm going to just go back briefly to this list here that I want to point out. The crucial point here is that it's meant to reject sides. It's neutral, impartial, it's independent. That's exactly the sort of position that's now under attack. So the Médecins Sans Frontières, which we'll hear about later, Doctors Without Borders, is created in the context of a war in Nigeria, in which a breakaway province, Biafra, is essentially cordoned off by the Nigerian forces, and it's starved into submission. And many of these French doctors, Red Cross doctors, go to Biafra, and they see what they take to be the kind of massacres that we'll talk about today in the 19th century, and they want to report them, and they're forbidden to report them by the Red Cross. Because if you bore witness to the suffering of the Biafrans, you would be helping them against the Nigerians. So witnessing is forbidden. So the leader of this is a man named Bernard Kouchner, whom you'll hear about later, who becomes French foreign minister, and we'll hear more about him later. He says, no, I see something horrible happening. It's my moral obligation to tell people. They break off from the Red Cross, and they found Physicians Without Borders. Physicians Without Borders also sees itself as politically neutral. That is to say, they'll go anywhere to help the suffering. But they also say, we're not above, we're still human. And it's our job to witness. So the Red Cross systematically has not witnessed. So they didn't witness against the Germans what they knew about the Holocaust. They didn't witness in Biafra. And the most recent case involving our country is a 2005 report, a secret report, that the Red Cross wrote on the conditions of the 16 high-value detainees that the Americans had in their custody. And it reported in this secret document treatment of these people, which the Red Cross felt to be torture, under UN protocols, under what the Americans had attacked the Russians for doing. I mean, you can get the reports now out. So they took it to be torture. And it's pretty raw stuff when you read this. And they sent the report, as the Red Cross is meant to do, to the government, our government. Because the Red Cross doesn't speak to the public, the Red Cross speaks to governments under this UN charter. It's the responsibility of governments to prevent torture. So the story is, if these people are being tortured, it can't be the government knows about it, because governments are meant to reject torture. So they hand this document to this point it was the Bush administration, and the document is not released. So the document that was subsequently released, it was found by a journalism professor here named Mark Danner, and published, got a great deal of world attention, and it got a furious response from the Red Cross saying, look, if you start releasing our documents, we're not going to be allowed into prisons. Danner's response was, if you guys aren't going to use what you discover to right these wrongs, I'm going to make it public. But so that's the Red Cross then represents the hard core of the unpolitical humanitarian from the 19th century right through to the present. So that's why I'm telling you about this, because you'll get this problem again and again in the history of human rights and humanitarian intervention. So it's meant to